horror answer some of the deeper philosophical questions that are primary to humanity, like, who are we? Is there a spiritual realm or an afterlife? What's good and evil?
You win.
1408 may seem like a cliched, shallow, Hollywoodized attempt at horror that owes its whole existence to a short story by Stephen King and the films of the genre that preceded it. But that's just a surface appraisal.
It does have the vague air of menace.
In reality, what lies beneath the surface of this film is a brilliant examination of what a person's life amounts to when it reaches its end. What binds us in our own personal hell, and, overall, what a person needs to do in order to escape that hell. "1408" is about Mike Enslin, a writer who, at the beginning of the movie, is researching a new book that is part of a series in which he investigates the paranormal in various settings across America. He wants to prove or disprove the existence of an afterlife because of the death of his young daughter, Katie. From this exposition, we establish one of the main themes of the film, an existential question. Is there an afterlife? And does God exist? For Mike, the verdict is reached on the grounds of God and an afterlife are untrue until proven true.
So you're saying there's no such thing as ghosts?
I'm saying I've never seen one, but they're awfully convenient for desperate hotels when the interstate moves away.
So, he is a bitter atheist who counts his daughter's death against the existence of God.
What kind of God would do this to a little girl? Because I know that ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties don't exist. Even if they did, there's no God to protect us from them, is there?
What happens to Mike over the course of the movie is, essentially, a resounding answer to his nihilistic resolve.
Finally, I got something to write about. A ghost that offers turn-down service.
The supernatural comes crashing in around him in the form of an evil room. But before we delve into what the room means in the context of the story, let's look into a scene that precedes the emergence of the supernatural. Mike, while surfing, gets thrashed by a wave and washes ashore coughing up water, nearly drowned. But why incorporate a scene like this when it doesn't seem to serve the narrative at all? Well, it does come up later as a starting point for when Mike thinks he's escaped the room. But in order to understand this scene and the rest of the movie, one needs to know a little about the Divine Comedy, or Dante's Inferno. The story of Dante's Inferno represents the soul's journey to God as people recognize the sin in their lives and reject that sin. Dante is able to see the effects of sin on a person by traversing the 9 layers of hell with the poet Virgil as his guide to tell him about which sin is being punished on each layer. Descending first through limbo, then lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and at the bottom, the deepest and coldest layer of hell, treachery, where Satan is encased in ice. In order to enter limbo, the first layer of hell, Dante must board a ferry to cross the river Acheron. While crossing, he faints and comes to on limbo's shore. Waking up on a shore has been used in other stories to signify the passing from one realm to another, as it is done in Inferno. And when Mike wakes up, washed ashore after his near-death experience, it is implied by the subtext of the movie that he really did die.
Are you okay, buddy? Hey, are you breathing?
This explains why, later in the film, it is where he is spat back out by 1408 to restart his endless cycle of psychological torment in which he inevitably returns back to the room. The start of his hell is limbo, where he arrives after he dies. This is indicated in the film through a shift in tone from somewhat realistic and banal before he dies to reflect the world of the living, to suspenseful, uneasy, and full of dread after his death, to reflect his precarious position in the afterlife, using more dramatic and disquieting camera movements and angles, a more invasive and claustrophobic depth of field, more abrupt editing,
It'll just be a minute, Mr. Enslin.
and more dissonant music that all forebodes his arrival in 1408. In Inferno, Dante is guided by Virgil, who teaches him to renounce the sin that he sees in order to have it be purged from him. When Mike enters the Dolphin Hotel, where 1408 is, the manager Gerald Olin attempts to dissuade Mike from going into the room. Olin is Mike's Virgil, and, like Virgil, who explains what each sin is on each layer, Olin explains what awaits for people who go into 1408 so as to keep Mike from entering.
I see. No one's ever lasted more than an hour.
Olin, in trying to prevent Mike from entering the room, acts as a guide through hell in the form of showing and explaining 1408's history, and also as a preventer to the torment that awaits him.
Well, during your investigation, did you discover the 22 natural deaths that have occurred in 1408?
Natural deaths?
All told, there have been 56 deaths in 1408. One Mr. Grady Miller drowned in his chicken soup.
That's hard to do. How did he do that?
How indeed.
But Mike, unlike Dante, instead of listening to his guide, goes into the room anyway, where Dante enters hell on divine grounds to see the consequence of sin. Mike enters 1408, his personal hell, after being enticed. But what entices him? His interest in disproving the paranormal, his desire to disprove God, his atheistic bitterness, his ego.
That's cute.
The doppelganger, in ancient mythology and stories, is also known as a double spirit, evil twin, or alter ego who was considered to be, if seen, an omen of death in some cultures. The doppelganger, in those mythos, might even try to plant malicious ideas in the minds of the ones they shadow in order to cause confusion or mislead. In Christianity, there is what is referred to as the sinful nature, or a nature within us opposed to God that desires to sin. The sinful nature is regarded with a sort of otherness to a person's consciousness, a dark alter ego that drives people to stay apart from God and seek what is sinful. To embrace the sinful nature and not pursue salvation results in damnation upon death. The sinful nature is what is being purged from Dante on his journey through hell. What Mike finds in 1408 is a mirror of his psyche, revealing all of his negative, dark, and tormented characteristics on his personal voyage through Inferno,
Dad, it's Michael.
to purge him of his own sinful nature.
As you were, I was. As I am, you will be.
The linkage to sin and hell in Christendom stems from two principles: that the sinful nature is responsible for torment after death, and two, the sinful nature is responsible for the torment one experiences during life. So, like the doppelganger, a sinful nature is an evil alter ego existing in one's own mind, acting as a tormentor and the cause of one's personal hell. 1408 is a reflection of Mike's sinful nature, and therefore the setting for his personalized hell. So what makes the room evil is the evil in himself.
It's an evil fucking room.
This is it?
You gotta be kidding me.
But if 1408 is simply a mirror of himself, a reflection of his evil tendencies to torment him,
But where is the bone-chilling terror? Show me the rivers of blood.
would the room simply be normal if he had attained salvation before his death?
It's just a room.
An empty room? The interesting philosophical take that 1408 has on limbo is that the descent into hell isn't necessarily mandatory. Mike doesn't wake up in torment after death. He starts off in limbo and is lured to the lower layers by his own sinful nature. Without his bitterness towards God and his fervent desire to dispel his existence and the existence of an afterlife, he would have never gone to the room, to hell. His doppelganger then essentially planted the notion in his mind and drove him there. Mike's double first appears when he is trying to reach out to someone to escape the room, but instead of finding another person, he finds only a mirror of himself staring back, a negative version, alone, sullen, sitting at a desk, a reflection of Mike and his darker tendencies, a writer depressed about the death of his daughter, embittered towards God for taking her away, and isolated from his wife for how she reminds him of her. So, alone in more ways than one, physically and spiritually, and about to be murdered by a psychotic killer. The consequences of remaining apart from God and embracing the sinful nature, a susceptibility to the torments of hell and the affliction of personal demons. Mike's sins, according to the qualifications of Inferno, are lust, gluttony, wrath, violence, fraud, and treachery. The room's evil design, derived from the tendencies of his sinful nature, descends Mike through his own Dante-esque hell on an eternal one-hour loop once he enters. It is not outright said that Mike has committed the sin of lust or adultery, but it is implied in the subtext. Mike has been separated from Lily, his wife, since his daughter died, but has he remained faithful? While we don't see Mike make an advance on a woman or vice versa, we see a slew of pretty young girls coming and going around him, visually putting in the mind of the viewer a juxtaposition between Mike and the presence of other women. First, there is the young girl in the bookstore who gushes over his first novel, The Long Road Home. Is there flirting between them? Perhaps. She likes his work and therefore him. He could maybe do something with that. Maybe he's taken advantage of a situation like this before. But after she references the relationship the main character has with his father in the book and asks if it is true, an upsetting subject for Mike, he politely says no, and she leaves. In the next scene, Mike is surfing at the beach with younger girls, and he gazes at one before being overtaken by the wave that ends him up in limbo. Was he lusting before he died? Then, when Mike is in limbo at the diner, we can spot 10 pretty young girls around him, 3 next to him, 6 outside, and 1 sitting behind him. If what tempts Mike, by means of the sinful nature, is what leads him to the lower layers of hell, could this be one of the potential gateways? Lust, tempted to some hellish dimension with promises of pleasure? When he enters the Dolphin Hotel to go into 1408, he checks out a young mother dressed in white with her baby in a carriage, and when she bends over to tend to the baby, and again when she enters the room next to 1408. Upon entering and examining the room, he flips through the menu on the TV and is tempted by the available pornography. He switches this off to open a Bible to 2 Samuel, chapter 11, the story of David and Bathsheba, in which David, the king of Israel, has an affair with a married woman, impregnates her, kills her husband, and is put, consequentially, at odds with God. This further enhances the subtextual motif of lust and adultery in the movie, but now bringing it into the supernatural by indicating that lust and sin, like in the story, put a person at odds with God and bring about suffering, which is, once again, the central theme to Dante's journey through hell. One of the first things he tries to do to escape the room, once he realizes he's trapped, is to get the attention of the young mother by pounding on her adjoining wall. Then he attempts to cross over to her room on an outside ledge, but when he views that the window for her room is gone, he starts back. As he is about to climb inside after nearly falling, the window starts to close. If it were to shut, he would be trapped in darkness, unable to rest in his precarious position with strong winds blowing over him. The punishment for lust in Inferno is similar in that one is tossed by strong winds and darkness with no time to rest. This is to reveal the true nature of lust, a howling darkness of helpless discomfort. In traversing over to the woman he was leering at in the lobby, he is set up to be trapped in the Dante equivalent of the second layer of hell. The sin of gluttony pertains to those who overindulged in sensual pleasures such as addicts. They are subjected to wallow in a putrid sludge produced by cold, toxic rain. Mike, as a victim of some form of abuse by his father, as implied by more subtext, is an alcoholic.
Alcohol.
Who is drinking in no small part to quash his grief over his daughter dying. The room, despite his tragic backstory, has no problem creating this layer of hell for him. A crack in one of the walls of 1408, caused by Mike throwing a chair, oozes putrid water and is, later, replicated all over the walls and the ceiling of the room during an earthquake in which icy water is sprayed over him. During this abrasive shower, Mike opens a bottle of booze he has been drinking, guzzles it, and pours it over his head. The sin of gluttony accompanied by the payment for that sin. The sin for the wrathful is found in the foul, swampy river Styx, where the actively wrathful fight each other on the surface, and the passively wrathful lie beneath the surface, gargling on their own symbolic hatred. Mike would be classified as passively wrathful, or sullen, in that he is depressed, bad-tempered, and gloomy.
Sir, I will not tolerate you speaking to me in that tone of voice.
You're an idiot! I'm gonna sue your ass! I'm gonna take legal action! What's wrong with you?
After he pours the booze over his head, he proceeds to strike a moving painting of a ship on a stormy sea. Before he can, though, the picture explodes, and he is submerged in the questionable water on the verge of drowning. Those in the seventh circle of hell are burning over a scorching desert plain. There is violence against neighbors, self, and in Mike's case, violence against God, which is blasphemy.
Is God there?
Yes.
Do you really believe that, Daddy?
Yes. You know what I think. We should have done more!
We did everything we
No,
could.
we didn't. We should have helped her fight.
Oh my God.
Instead of filling her head full of these stories about heavens and the clouds and nirvana and all that bullshit.
His payment is seen in the heat of the room.
I need you to send somebody to fix my thermostat. The room's on fire.
A burning sensation that he'll have to revisit on a loop forever. There are many arenas to fraud, the eighth circle of hell. Mike's particular brand would be a sower of discord. This is the sin of discombobulating society in order to satiate an egotistical drive. Mike perpetrated this discord through his writing that purposefully dispels an afterlife and the existence of God.
You like shattering people's hopes.
Oh, that's bullshit!
Why do you think people believe in ghosts? For fun? No, it's the prospect of something after death. How many spirits have you broken?
While in limbo, Mike, through the lens of disquieting camera work that forebodes his upcoming hell, is layered in front of and behind spinning fans, blades chopping at his figure and beheading him. Then seen again when he thinks he's left the room, signaling that his escape is false, and that he is still in the realm of Inferno. Sowers of discord are mutilated and slashed into pieces by a demon with a bloody sword. In the room is a hammer-wielding psycho who is constantly swinging at Mike, threatening a similar fate. The final layer of hell is treachery, where people who have betrayed others in close relationships are frozen in ice. Mike's treachery stems from his abandonment of his wife after their daughter's death.
Walk out, you disappear. Leaving me what? Not divorced, separated? I don't know, it's not clear.
The room, thusly, freezes.
This is level 9. Deepest level of hell. Furthest remove from all light and warmth.
And while trapped in this icy environment for his treachery, Mike's doppelganger, the mirror of his sinful nature, shows up to betray Lily once more.
Just come on, come now.
Good.
I need
Yes.
you. Talk to anybody, just come straight up to the 14th floor and walk through the door.
Do not!
It's life or death, sweetie.
Go!
Okay.
Come up to the room!
I need to talk to you about Kate.
Shut up! Lily,
Come on.
don't listen to
Yes,
him!
good.
It's a trick!
Right there.
Don't come up here!
Purgatory is an old and widely held belief about the afterlife.
Thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast in fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away.
The Roman Catholic Church still believes in the existence of purgatory for those who need to be purified from attachments to sin by God so they can inherit a state of bliss in heaven. God is not a tormentor, but he does allow for the reality of the sin that one has committed to manifest, as it does, in the form of pain. If not for God's desire to eliminate sin, many might be trapped in hell. But, out of grace, he allows for the purging of sin that prevents people from entering heaven so they can at some point join him in paradise. In the second part of the Divine Comedy entitled Purgatorio, once Dante passes through hell, he is on the other side of the earth and has to scale a mountain called Purgatory. Each layer of the mountain is made up of one of the 7 deadly sins that Dante will have to traverse so as to mature spiritually through suffering and reach Paradiso, or paradise, a blissful Eden, which resides at the top of the mountain where Beatrice, Dante's love, waits for him. Mike, after experiencing the many layers of hell as spawned from his sinful nature, seemingly escapes the room only to be forcibly returned.
I was out! I was out! I was out!
Within his state of hopelessness, he reaches out to God.
I was out. Please, God. I know I was out.
And immediately, a door appears. Mike begrudgingly asks for it to be opened.
Open it.
And as it does, he can hear the laughter of children, the preacher's voice from the beginning of the movie talking about how the payments of sin is hell, and as this portal to some other dimension impacts him, he sees his daughter.
Daddy,
No. You're not Katie.
I need help. Please.
You're not real.
Followed by witnessing her die all over again and turn to ash.
You bastard.
Upon experiencing this pain, there is a cathartic burst of anger, followed by collapsing, passing out, and the room restarting its tormenting 1-hour loop. What is being purged from him is the root of one of the largest reasons why he indulges his sinful nature, his bitterness toward God for allowing his daughter to die. When he wakes up at the start of the next hour of hell, he is drained. All of his anger and hubris are gone, and he is no longer interested in self-preservation, but only in 2 things: making sure the room doesn't claim his wife.
By the way, Mr. Enslin, your wife just called. She'll be here in 5 minutes and we'll send her straight up.
She's not involved. You can't have her.
And not dying selfishly.
I've lived the life of a selfish man. But I don't have to die that way.
The room entices him to suicide.
You can choose to relive this hour over and over, or you can take advantage of our express checkout system.
A selfish death to avoid future pain. But it is clear, due to the other souls trapped there repeatedly committing suicide on a loop, that if he were to take his own life, 1408 would claim his soul for eternity.
This is 5.
Ignore the siren. Even if you leave this room, you can never leave this room.
So, he decides to sacrifice himself in order to destroy the room and save Lily from being overtaken. This self-sacrifice signals that Mike's attachment to his sinful nature has been severed, and his own life is forfeited because of his love for others.
This may not all be real, and I may not even be real, but this fire... that's gotta be real.
This sentiment is mirrored by Christ when he professes that, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. Christ's sake is righteousness, or the state in which a person is no longer pursuing their own lusts and desires, but pursuing what is beneficial to themselves and others. So, in setting fire to the room, Mike is also setting fire to his own sinful, selfish alter ego. And when he is dragged out of the room and saved by firemen, what is actually being saved is his true self that is set right with God and repulsed by the self that comprised the layers of hell he underwent.
Don't go in that room.
What's he saying? I can't hear. What was that, mister?
It's evil.
A Fade to White opens on the newly purified Mike in a hospital recovering from his burns with Lily comforting him. Lily is Mike's Beatrice, a symbol of purity and innocence that awaits Dante on his completion of the journey toward God. Mike, in severing the connection to his sinful nature, is now able to be with Lily and live a life free from the pain of sin.
But you're gonna be okay. Just need to rest.
Are you really here with me right now?
The camera then crossfades on a city street and pans up to the top of an apartment complex, paralleling how paradise is at the top of Mount Purgatory. This is followed by another crossfade over the apartment complex to a set of white, empty shelves. The apartment building, like a hotel in that it is comprised of rooms stacked on top of one another, is superimposed on top of a similar complex of shelves, which elicits the comparison of the shelves to that of rooms. These shelves, being white and barren, is a callback to the idea that what you take with you in your soul is what follows you in your life. A similar notion can be found in Christianity, in which Christ says, "A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him." When Mike entered 1408, he brought his sinful nature with him, and the room tormented him with it. Now that Mike has separated away from the sinful nature, the metaphorical room, that parallels himself, is empty and purified. Tracking away from the shelves, we see that Mike is establishing his new life with Lily, who wears white, the color of purity, in his own paradise, out of the hell, past purgatory, and at peace with the afterlife and God.
Don't you love me anymore?
Of course I do, sweetheart.
I wish we could stay together. You, me, and Mommy.
We can. I got you right here. I got you now, okay? Oh my God. I'm not gonna let you go.
(1408). Instead of harping on fears of survival against predators like in slasher, supernatural, and zombie movies, goes after a more cerebral and frankly more important aspect of life to be afraid of: the seemingly innocuous nature of evil in our own lives.
Some smartass spoke about the banality of evil. If that's true, then we're in the seventh circle of hell. It does have its charms.
And where that evil could actually lead, if held onto, a state of ever-increasing hell. If all the negatives inside us were allotted and made into a person, would we look much different than our evil twin?
It's not that what I'm seeing is not real. It just ain't as real as it seems.
And if given a voice and a will, what would this negative version of us say and do? If given charge over our own wills, where would it lead us? Using the narrative of the Divine Comedy, 1408 gives a unique visualization of what may be occurring inside of many of us right now. Our negatives weighing us down with torments that come from consistently thinking and doing what is fundamentally unhealthy to our minds and bodies. This endless spiraling into our own personal hells should be familiar.
I'm losing my mind.
The journey out of hell that the film offers may not be as familiar. What keeps us in hell, according to Dante's Inferno and the film, is our unwillingness to give up our negative self or sinful nature. But if we were to expel what keeps us bound to what afflicts us and pursue what is right and pure, giving up the self that is self-serving and giving into the self that loves and, like Mike and Dante, is at peace with God, we could escape our own rooms of torment and isolation.
We've only just begun to live.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video essay, be sure to check out these other video essays from Real Dimensional Pictures, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis to come.
A kiss for luck and we're on our way.